It's a pretty small little pool of artists in the Twin Cities. I want to talk about several different things. I paint two different ways, and we're going to talk about that tonight. First of all, my background is I used to be the really young teacher, and I'm not so young anymore. And I think I've been teaching watercolor now for just close to 30 years. It's been amazing. I will paint watercolor my whole life. I love water media. I'll show you some of the things how I incorporate both the watercolor and the acrylic together. I started out when I went to Iowa State and got a graphic design degree. So when I came out of college, I'm the youngest of the old school artists because I came out of college right before computers came into play. So I had to hand letter and hand render everything, just like Norman Rockwell and some of the people that did the magazine. And I got a job as an assistant art director at a little ad firm, and we did a lot of work for Pillsbury and General Mills. I used to paint the Doughboy back in the mid-'80s, and so that was one of my first little jobs I would have to do a lot. And back then it was wonderful because we had marker kits. We had marker pads and we had design markers. And we would do layouts, we would do real quick marker comps, and it was such a, it almost went hand in hand with watercolor because you had to just state things. You had to draw and you had to block things in, you had to be fairly quick about it. And I remember when I was just, I don't know, I was 22 years old and I went to get a freelance job, and the art director was Doug Liu. And Doug was incredible at that time. I mean, you could kind of figure the age, if this is probably 1988. And I was young and Doug had a ton of experience, and I remember Doug Liu just taking a watercolor brush and just doing a little mock-up for me with a watercolor brush, and he says, oh, I can do it with a marker too, and he did it with a marker, and I'm like, if you can do it that good, why am I here to do it? And he says, I'm too busy, and I'm like, oh, I felt terrible. But anyway, I think back all those years, and I think of all the years of having a brush in my hand and a pencil in my hand, and now I have so much more confidence and skill and hand skills Doug Liu had back then, and I'm approaching what he has now. So it's been an exciting journey. I have gone from a graphic designer to an illustrator, and then I illustrated for, I don't know, 10, 15 years in Chicago and Minneapolis, and now all I do is paint, and I love it. I'm going to show you a couple artists. I have been fascinated with woodcuts my whole life. And so I've always looked at a woodcut and said, boy, I'd like to do that, but I don't want to spend the time removing all that wood. But I like the look of it. And so William Rice was a woodblock artist in the 1920s out of Southern California. And the thing that some of these early artists did, these woodcut artists, this is Gustav Baumann. They're working in the time of the arts and crafts period, and I just love the design quality of that. And so as I painted, I wanted to be a graphic designer. That's how I was trained. I wanted my painting to be more of a designer. And like these woodcut artists, they flatten their pictorial space. And that's kind of a hard concept to understand. They're not trying to create deep atmospheric space. They're creating flat, stylized, decorative space. So a lot of these pieces, some of my plein air pieces might be a little different on the table, but a lot of these prints up here that I have, I've kind of developed my style. It's a hybrid between a lot of these past people that I really enjoy, and I'm making the conscious decision that I don't want them to look super realistic and representational. I want them to be decorative and stylized and flattened. So like a quilt maker can make a beautiful piece of art, it's flattened. A person that does stained glass, it's amazing, it's decorative, it's flat. A woodcut artist can't make soft edges, it's all hard edge, it's flat. So I was drawn to the hard edge of this style that I developed. some artists that really resonated with me is Tom Thompson. What these artists did, a lot of them, was they came up with this idea that they were going to paint their wooden panels orange or red and go out into the woods, the Canadian woods where there were all these greens and blues, and paint opposites on top of that warm color and let a little bit of that broken color come through. So these books are fairly small, you can look at them, but what they did was they fractured up the landscape and they flattened the space and they created this wonderful, it's really a Canadian style. If you know Robert Jen, who just passed away out of British Columbia, and Mike Svob, or Svab, however you say it, there is a Canadian look about this rugged, kind of rough-hewn painting style. And this second one is a highlight shape that I left, a shadow shape that I painted, and then I considered a background. And this face here is actually simpler, but it's more realistic, and it reads from across the room. This one starts to fall apart and get a little cartoony. I love this concept of trying to simplify a scene into a shadow shape. So whether I'm painting a big studio piece or whether I'm on location, I'm always trying to find the shadow shape in a scene. And if you want to go paint outside, paint in the mornings and paint in the late afternoons, you're going to get so much more drama because you'll have a highlight shape and a shadow shape. And it's more dramatic. Some people say, I can't draw a stick figure. You have the artist brain and you have this analytical brain, and you've got to let that analytical brain go. You've got to use that artist brain. The left brain, the analytical brain, says, I have a symbol for a tree, and this is what a tree looks like. And I have a symbol for a person, and this is what a person looks like. But if you get rid of all that and just look at it and not try to name it, just say, that's a shape. I see shapes in the front row, and draw the shapes you see, you're going to get more accurate of the tree shape and the human shape. And, okay. All right, I just went to China a couple of weeks ago. I went to China for the second time. I went for 2 weeks. And 6 years ago, I went over there and I taught for 3 weeks over there, and I had a show. And it was such an amazing experience. Some of the stylistically, I had that style before I went over, but it was just insightful, some of the things I learned. It's so different. You know, over here we want to try to find our focal point. Where's our focal point going to be? And there was this old calligrapher that said the first thing he wants to identify is where his resting point is going to be in a painting. And I just thought that was so wonderfully opposite. And I'm so spastic and hyperactive. I look at my paintings and I'm like, there is no resting point, you know? So I want to talk about, and this is going to lead me right into this demo that I'm going to do. This yin and yang concept over there, you know, you kind of see it. Everybody's seen a little yin and yang, and it's kind of gimmicky, you think. But it's so amazing because, you know, the black shape creates the white shape, and the white shape creates the black shape. And, oops, I got a cough. So I'm up under the North Shore here, and I've got in watercolor, I've got trees and so forth. Most of us in this room. And I've painted black on white. And so the black shape, because I painted the black shape, is the positive shape, and the white shape is the negative shape. Now, if I were to take the exact same scene and take a blackboard and paint white on a blackboard to get the exact same shape, the white shape is the positive shape, and the black shape now becomes the negative shape. And the black shape is so much more interesting created negatively like this than created positive. So this is how a woodcut would create this scene. This is how a watercolor artist would paint this scene. You would paint dark on your light piece of paper. But a woodcut artist would have to remove everything that's not dark. And essentially, they would create this. And so this fascinated me so much that I thought, instead of actually carving out the wood to make a wood block, if I painted mask and imagined myself doing a woodcut, I could create an open area and paint this. So I could essentially do a painterly version of a woodcut. And that's what all these pieces are. So when I make a shape, I try to approach it by the opposite side. And it seems like, so I mentioned earlier that I really like to, I like to make it work with value. So here's a canoer up. And I have so many canoes and so many little boats. I love the Boundary Waters, and I love the north. I love the rocks on the North Shore. I'm really drawn to that area. So me being the graphic designer that I am, I almost want to make this logo. When I look at a landscape, I want to break it into 3 or 4 shapes. And so here we are up north, and all this tree line, I've got that into one shape. I've got my canoer and reflection into one shape, and then I've got some midtones in there. So if I were to paint it conventionally with watercolor, I could create something like this. I'm trying to, really have the color mix on the paper. I'm looking for beautiful granulation. I'm looking for direct passage. I don't want to overwork it. So all these things of transparent watercolor, there's nothing better than a fresh watercolor. And a lot of times, here is taking it to the next level and making it more decorative and making it more stylized and using this style. And I'm creating a completely different look. Some people say, I love this, I hate this, don't do this, stay with this. I'm going 2 directions and I'm just doing a wonderful thing. I know so many artists in here that have so many different styles and are going so many different directions. that it's fun, and it's not it's your style as it develops. Your style, all a style is tendencies. You have to go a long way down a road. You have to figure out what you like, the tendencies of your stroke, what trips your trigger, what stimulates you, and just keep going and going and going and going down that road. And if you go all the way down it, it's a dead end. Well, then you turn around and you go a different direction. But people have to try to. Part of the reason why I paint this way is partly I'm stimulated by it, and another reason is it's different, it's unique. People can look at. All right, this is cheating a little bit. This is a place up on the North Shore. I go up to the North Shore and I spend a lot of time up there, and I paint up there and I camp up there. And I love the waterfalls. I just love the rock. I'm kind of a geology guy. I love the fractured rock, that ancient rock of the shore. And so this was a little painting that I did. It's kind of up by Silver Bay. Silver Bay is really industrial looking, but there's a couple neat little stretches of beach right in there that I kind of hunker in. And early morning, the sun is coming up, and the sun is just catching the outside edge of these trees and rock. And as I started to develop this style, it first started happening when I was painting rock and the fractures in rock. So they always say, paint what you know. So this is kind of what I know. So I drew this scene out. What I like to do, this is a little sketch that I did. So often I love to do little sketches in the field. I don't know if you can see this. I've got just book and book and book of rock pattern that's fractured up rock, and I carry the fracture patterns all the way through the whole picture, almost like a quilt. And I love to do little thumbnails of scenes, and oftentimes, you paint a little beautiful fresh thing and then you translate it up big, and the little one was wonderful and the big one's a dud. And sometimes I'll take a little sketch like this and I'll go to the Instaprints and I'll blow it up and paste it together and put it on the wall, and it's like, wow, I need to be big and simple. And I am kind of big and I am kind of simple, so it's actually a plus. But it's so easy to make something twice as large and put 4 times the detail in it. And you don't even realize you're doing it. You think, well, geez, it's really big, I better add a lot of little...
What was that in that big bottle?
This is matte medium. And matte medium is just acrylic polymer without the pigment. And I love to use it. It makes acrylic kind of semi-transparent. And sometimes I use it 90% matte medium and 10% pigment. And I can almost go from watercolor to acrylic, and you can't tell where the acrylic stops and the watercolor starts. So I usually put a blob of it out and mix. So I'm painting. That's pretty thinned out. That's pretty thinned out acrylic. I'm going to carry this into the sky a little bit. The difficult thing with this particular style that I've kind of developed is you do have to kind of paint blind. It's like a woodcut, you know, when you're cutting that thing out, you don't know exactly what it's gonna look like. So I'm gonna just the magic. It's hard to kind of get what I'm doing here for a while, and then you'll see when I reveal it how it looks. So even when I paint acrylic, I'm still trying to be kind of red browns and things. You know, the blue-gray rock up there is basalt, and the reddish stuff is rhyolite.
What's the surface that you're painting on?
This is just a regular old piece of 140-pound cold press. So I still like to have a little bit of strokes and edges and variety. Just like when I paint a watercolor, I try to make the color mix on the paper. I still like to have a little bit of
What masking do you recommend? Is there a particular
The particular brand I use is this big jug of Winsor Newton.
Okay.
And that costs like $33 a bottle. So when there's a blick, when there's like a $10 off one product or something, that's the thing I always get.
Have you tried the thing that sells in a hardware store?
Yeah, it's too aggressive. The seam sealer and some of that stuff. I've had people do it. There's a Kathy, you probably know, Dan Mondlock is up in your neck of the woods. He was telling me about there's like an industrial thing that you can buy this in the jug that's half the price, 4 times the quantity. And I need to talk to Dan and find out about that again. The seam sealer is too, it rips the paper all to pieces.
Well, the one I use is Tender Mender.
Tender Mender, so it is a little bit,
Very nice.
is it similar?
Absolutely.
And it's, I got to write that down.
And
I'll get that info from
And
you.
it's a lot cheaper.
Tender Mender, I love that.
Tear Mender?
Tear Mender.
Tear Mender.
Oh, Tear Mender.